connecting security solutions with security leaders. Security you should know starts now.
Welcome to Security You Should Know. Today we're talking about Tuskira and what they're doing in preventative cyber defense. And really, the problem they're trying to address is data sprawl. So we have on Keith McCartney, VP Security and IT at DNA Nexus, and Mike Woods, VP of Cybersecurity at GE Vernova. Gentlemen, I have to ask, why is data sprawl still a problem?
I think it's at the heart of a big problem for cybersecurity. There's just so much telemetry coming from so many different tool sets. Our tool sets are sprawly. We have different tools for different needs. Our systems are sprawly. We have IT, we have OT. So things are very chatty. And then when you get down in under the hood, the schemas and the data models are not always normalized.
Yeah, Keith, we know this is a historic problem, but why are we seeing this as still a problem?
Well, we've got dynamic environments, especially at scale in larger companies. You can either lock everything down and you have no change, or you allow for innovation and you've got change. So you're constantly trying to track that change, understand what it means, and identify where you've got risk in the environment.
All right, well, to try and get some answers here and learn a little more about Tuskira, we're going to be talking to Piyush Sharma, the CEO and co-founder of Tuskira. And we always start out by answering three essential questions. So Piyush, how do I explain the value of your solution to my CEO? What does your solution do and what does it not do? And then we've got to dig into the pricing model. So can you give us these preliminaries?
The biggest fundamental of cybersecurity is about finding two things. Attackers are not always just focusing on exploiting vulnerabilities or exploiting toxic combinations. They're also looking at opportunity to evade your defenses. One of the things that industry have so focused on identifying what can be breached or how an attacker can exploit your vulnerabilities without and missing the fact that attacker at the same time is trying to evade your defenses. There is no lack of protection. There is no lack of defenses. The organizations are drowning in security tools, yet still getting breached. Why is that so? Every security tool connects to your assets and environments and organization and collects a ton of data, but they don't talk to each other. Attacker moved faster, and thanks to AI, this is actually getting accelerated. So what attacker could do in 3 months or 6 months, now they're able to do it in less than a day, which means that the way they gonna exploit your vulnerabilities and the problems, security problems, they will also be able to find more ways to evade your defenses and getting your infrastructure. This is where Tuskira comes in. Tuskira solved this problem by connecting all your security tools, not just your detection tools, also your protection, your compensating controls, identifying actual attackable problems by running certain simulations on our proprietary generative AI-based simulating technology. And then it actually correlates with how you have deployed your defenses to identify what is that matters to you and are those problems can actually be defended by your tools, any of your tool across your stack. So instead of waiting for an attack to happen, we can preemptively predict that what are the vulnerabilities and what are the tool attacker is going to evade so that you can preemptively identify how do you optimize these controls. And when we talk about these controls, we're not talking about just the protection control. We are also talking about preventative controls and your detection controls. If your organization needs to be protected, you have to scale your defenses. And that has not been happening in the industry. This is where, think of it as turning your cybersecurity from a more reactionary defense into a AI-powered security operations, which is very preemptive. That's how you reduce risk and optimize your spending, improving your security efficiency.
And then what about the pricing model, Piyush?
We look at all your tools. We look at how many assets you have, what your users and devices. That's are the core assets that you want us to protect. And that's what we focus as part of the pricing. Nothing rocket science, very, very simple, which we will identify what assets that matters to you. We'll find certain weightage against those assets. Your assets could be your cloud assets, your on-prem asset, your OT assets, your servers, your users, and your applications.
All right, CISOs, we've gotten a taste for this, for what Tuskira is offering here. I'm sure you have a lot of questions. There are some fascinating concepts there. So, Mike, let's start with you. What other questions do you have about Tuskira?
Let's just start with a little bit on where does this sit in the Venn diagram, if you will, of all of the other tools that are hey, we're the all-in-one shop for you. There's a lot of different products offering that same sort of capability out there. Can you give me some understanding of where you see it fitting in the Venn diagram between vulnerability management, maybe continuous threat exposure, and posture management, and all of these other areas that products are saying, hey, we can be your all-in-one. What makes your product different, and where do you see it fitting in that Venn diagram, if you will?
The simplest way I can explain this problem is today you have two kind of tools. One set of tools that are finding your problem, they're like problem finders. And the second set of tools who are actually taking actions, like your SOAR, who are automating some of the response of the actions. What has challenged where we sit in is we look at your vulnerability problems, or we also looking at your threats or 0-day, and we also looking at your alerts coming from the real-time detections. We are going to sit in the middle of your SOAR and your detection tools like VM or vulnerability management, EASM, DAST, AppSec tools, triage all the critical problems that you have, identify how do you manage or respond to these threats using your existing control set. That's number one. Number two, your point was how we are different. When we look at the threats or 0-day or vulnerability, we are not looking at just remediating or patching. We are looking at taking another step to go and take some mitigations on that. If attackers are able to exploit a vulnerability in less than a day, your patching is not going to scale at that number. Remediation and patching has a law of physics problem, and it is going to hit the ceiling pretty soon. What do you have in your control? Your control is you have the control of the tools that you purchase, like your EDR, firewall, web application firewall, email security, all these tools. And all these tools are very well capable tools, have all the capabilities, but they are very deep technology stacks. Now, this is where Tuskira really, really powerful. And this is the most unique part of Tuskira, which is we can actually correlate all the threats coming from your existing tool, correlate with the tool, how you have deployed your protection stack, identify where the gaps in your defenses are, and just do those mitigations. Today, customers are talking about that, hey, 200,000 vulnerabilities, but most tools will not be able to tell you that how many are defended vulnerabilities and how many are undefended vulnerabilities. You will not going to get breached on things that you know. You're going to get breached on the things that you are not defending. And that's the most unique part of Tuskira. It's a very hard problem that we are solving, and we're solving very elegantly.
One of the things that we've seen is most tools have branded themselves as some type of AI, or at least having an AI function. How has Tuskira approached this that's different? And how can we trust your AI and your models to make relevant conclusions about our environments?
Actually, I love the question because I used AI only once and deliberately only once. So you're right. There are a ton of tools who are trying to position themselves as AI. First and foremost is AI is not a database. It's not rows and columns that you can somehow put into retrofit into your infrastructure and an application and somehow it will work. AI requires data. Data needs to be transformed in a structure that AI will understand at a scale. In security industry, the biggest problem is the data is too much. There's too much data. And if you want your AI to be able to do the right level of reasoning, you have to apply AI first approach, not the AI later approach. Why am I saying that? So when we started this journey, we realized very quickly that the AI has its own limitations in terms of how big context they can take. If I have to analyze 300,000 or a million vulnerabilities, the contextual data around this will be in petabytes. This is where the whole agentic AI helps us in the picture. So Tuskira, I created its own Tuskmind. We call it Tuskmind. Tuskmind is our framework that brings data and the AI together. One of the fundamental way we're solving the problem is, and the AI scaling problem is, we don't bring data to the AI, we bring AI to the data, number one. Number two, we understand from cyber, we have been in cyber for a very long time, we made sure that the models we are using are not trained on customer data. And that actually help us scale even better because the models are domain experts trained on specific use cases, and they are not supposed to know what the customer data is all about. This is why there are two big elements of the platform. Number one, the mesh. Mesh is nothing but an ontology that defines the data across your assets and findings, alerts, and your defenses. And the second part is how do you break down the AI problems or AI use case into smaller pieces. That was the first part. The second part, what models? We are using multiple small language models. They are enriched, they are fine-tuned as we are seeing a lot of threats, correlation. These models are also trained on various different algorithms on how do we detect attack path, how do we define vulnerabilities, their criticality, understanding about cloud infrastructure, understanding about OT infrastructure. For example, in order to understand a vulnerability and its impact, you need to understand application topology, and that's something our AI can actually do inherently. This is why it is not a simple thing to do if you want to do it right. And if you don't do it right, you won't scale as a product. So we have been very centered and very focused around how do you use the power of small language models, scale it out to millions and millions of data points.
Hey, one other question comes to mind on this, because you had mentioned earlier, patching is more of a lagging activity versus, your protective controls, technology you have deployed within your infrastructure or your estate. So what is your stance on how to look at AI going forward? I can't tell you how many new concepts have come up almost daily. I have trouble keeping up with it. I subscribe to a lot of things. I'm sure a lot of you do as well in terms of trying to get information on this. So what are you doing with the product to make sure that you're keeping up with the pace of change in the market?
You actually asked two questions. Number one, how do you really do it? Means, how do you keep a pace that AI is changing, constantly changing? And number two was looking at our space. There are so much vaporware around building AI product and using AI as a term. Let me first answer that vaporware thing. And I'm very confident about what I'm saying. So there are two kinds of products that exist in the AI. One, who use AI for conversational, which is I'll throw you XYZ AI as a term and give you an interface where you can ask your questions. 99% of the products out there today are like that. There is no rocket science in that because that's a very simple solved problem. Why it is solved problem? Behind the scene, vendors probably using public models or their own private models, but some form of conversation that analysts having to do. The second grade of the technology is where AI can actually be augmented as well as autonomous. This will happen only when you use AI for reasoning. This is where we started that if we had really have to change the life of a security operator, you have to do more reasoning using AI and let operator decide how they want to react to it. I would make a claim, every vendor will make the claim, but essentially it is all about that how fast you're able to analyze the entire data set of some of the large enterprises and how quickly you are able to create an outcome. Outcome could be is how much noise reduction I'm able to do, how many threats we are able to neutralize. Now, neutralization means that how accurately you are able to identify what policies in your firewall, WAF, etc. needs to be changed based on the threats we have. That was the first set on the tech part. How do we keep up? This is built in as part of the platform where some of these capabilities, like if I have to bring in new model tomorrow, let's say Berkeley or Berkeley Research Lab or Stanford Research Lab come back, said, hey, I have a better model than DeepSeek R1. Now, how do you do it? If you think that the use case is conversation, you're always under pressure of replacing these models because you need more thinking, more pre-training. But we are using for reasoning or empirical calculations. So what happens is, in our case, we limit the AI or the model by being very specific on the fine-tuning and providing very specific context data. This allows our models to be less prone to changes because we controlling the data, we controlling the fine-tuning. So these models to us are nothing but an engine, a security operator like an assistant, but more with the blinders and the limited use cases that we want them to deliver. If you think cyber is not a generic conversational problem, cyber is all about correlating patterns and data.
That's great. We talked a little bit about how you get the data, how you normalize the data, how you make sense and prioritize the data. Then what happens after that? How do you fit into our ecosystem for remediation? What can we expect there?
Sure. I'm going to touch two things, Keith, here. One is remediation and the second is mitigations. And I'll explain both why it is important. So, and I'll take a security, the real use case. There was a breach happened sometime in 2024. A very large enterprise that got breached. 3 vulnerabilities was used. They were medium and low critical vulnerability. Today, you can remediate or patch only high compliance critical vulnerabilities, whatever based the SLA of 90 days, 60 days, 45 days, whatever the SLAs you have. The way we fit into your infrastructure is we don't have any agents or anything. We 100% APIs. We connect to different controls through their control plane, bring in the contextual data, and then we start generating our own intelligence. The point I'm going to make about remediation is that remediation is essential. Remediation will happen and has to happen, but it takes its own pace. It has its own velocity because there are a lot of severe impact it can bring in to the product, and you don't want to break your systems. So remediation that's why the pace of remediation is not going to go any further than where we are. However, the controls that you are using, for example, let's say there is a remote code execution vulnerability we found in your environment, which is highly impactful based on the exposure posture, based on internet, and et cetera, et cetera. Now, there are two ways to do it. One, should we identify that there is a protective agent sitting on the workstation or compute on which this vulnerability was reported? That could actually help you in mitigating the lateral movement of attacks. Or you can actually go and tune your initial access products like firewall or web application firewall or API gateways. Or you can actually optimize your reverse proxies if your application is so critical that they won't let you change any of your posture. You can probably change your reverse proxies or SASEs so that you can block some exfiltration of the data. And this is the beauty, we call it mitigation, where vulnerability exists, but you contain the posture or exposure of that vulnerability by using the technology that you already have. And I love the concept, but personally, I'm fascinated about what we are able to do using just by the data. 20 years ago, no one could think actually is this something like this can be built. Where think about the world where you constantly see the problems are being reported by all of your 8, 10, 20 tools. And at the same time, there is an engine sitting in the middle who's constantly telling you that, Keith, these are the 5, if you make these 5 policy changes, your 80% vulnerabilities get mitigated. I could not imagine a couple of years ago, and it is happening because of 2 reasons. One, data commodity. So data platforms like Snowflake, Databricks have changed the game of how you collect the data, how you normalize the data. And the second part is the power of generative AI, without which it is impossible to get done. And that is why all the platforms, and there will be companies and the vendors who will talk about that, we already have the mitigations, but they're essentially only talking about providing you workflows around service ticketing, sending to Jira, ServiceNows, but not the real mitigation like we're talking about.
Piyush, before we get out of here, what haven't we asked that we need to know about Tuskira?
There are 2 or 3 salient points, which generally always in the back of our head, but doesn't really come out. Number 1, we don't replace your existing security tools. We enhance and unify them. We have bidirectional conversation with your security tools where your tool can give us the data. We can create a risk of that data by running all our simulations and analytics and give you data back. Number 1, we don't generate generic vulnerability reports. We believe in brutal prioritization of the vulnerability, and we use defensibility to prioritize your vulnerability, not just exploitability. Exploitability has been a very loud, noisy concept. What we do is when we receive a vulnerability or a threat or a 0-day, we look at from the angle of your ability to defend that vulnerability, not just how somebody can exploit it. And that actually changed the game of how a vulnerability can be analyzed and understood. And number 3, we are not detection control. We are preemptive control. AI is all about finding the next word. Preemptive security and Tuskira is all about predicting and preemptive the attacker's next move. And this is where AI is really good at. And this is where we are going, that looking at your control posture, looking at your defense posture, looking at your application posture, we can actually predict what are the top 2, top 3, top 4 ways which has the highest probability of getting exploited, and what simple, small changes can actually give you an 80% impact.
That's it for this episode of Security You Should Know. To learn more, head on over to tuskira.ai. That's Tuskira.ai. Big thanks to Keith and Mike for helping us learn more about Tuskira, and a big thank you to Piyush Sharma from Tuskira for their time and being game to answering all of these questions. Thank you for listening to Security You Should Know.
That wraps up another episode of Security You Should Know. If you like this program, please subscribe, tell your friends, and leave us a review. All companies showcased on this program are sponsors of CISO Series. If your company would like to be spotlighted and interviewed by our security leaders, go to our contact page on CISOseries.com or just email us at info@cisoseries.com. Thank you for listening to Security You Should Know, connecting security solutions with security leaders.